Hello and welcome to the Use of Force videos in court cases don't tell the whole story. This program is brought to you by the American Bar Association Young Lawyers Division and our webinar sponsor, the TASA Group. Since 1956, the TASA Group has helped thousands of attorneys identify a variety of quality expert witnesses for their cases in virtually every category, always at no charge unless an expert is designated or engaged. Joining us today is Tim Demoff. Tim Demoff, CPP, a multi-certified, award-winning, and internationally recognized security and HR management consultant, speaker, author, media commentary, and expert witness, is president and founder of Sachs Consulting and Investigative Services Incorporated, a high-risk HR and security consulting and investigation firm located in Akron, Ohio. Tim, we'll hand things over to you to get us started.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And either good morning or good afternoon to all of our participants, depending on where you're at. I do have to make my disclaimer, as all of you or most of you or all of you are attorneys. I am not an attorney, but I do want to say I'm an established, recognized court expert, and I have testified for over 18 years in federal courts, appeals courts, state courts, and local courts across the United States. And I've testified and can testify in all states. And my expertise is in the different areas of law enforcement procedures, security procedures, and the human resource or corporate arena. 20 years in law enforcement and now 20 years in the private side of security investigations and in the human resource sides with all sorts of variety of clients. Okay, as I said before, I'm not an attorney, but I got a lot of interesting stuff to share with you, and I can give you a lot of information today on this new trend, this new challenge, as we want to position it, with the use of video, body-worn cameras, people on the sidelines taking videos and pictures, cameras on buildings in different areas. It's all under the video. And the video comes to court along with the officers or the accusations for all sorts of different things. And initially, when we're talking about video, we're talking about use of force with videos in court. And first thing we got to identify is the videos in court, videos in general. Do not, and I repeat, do not tell the whole story. And as we go through here today, I'll explain to you how the videos don't tell the whole story. And the problem is we need to educate the public. We need to educate juries, judges, attorneys, witnesses, legal experts that you can't rely solely on the video. The video is just another piece, or as I say, another spoke in the wheel for your both sides of the court cases and during the course of the case. So, one, do not totally rely on a video. In many cases, they're very helpful. In many cases, they're not or hardly helpful at all or confusing. So we'll talk all about that. And please, if you have questions, you can submit your questions, and Tracy will let me know, and I would like to answer questions as they come. Halfway through or two-thirds, I'll specifically take a break and say questions once in a while, and at the end, we'll take questions. But let's engage questions as they come. Really makes it more interesting and interactive. All right, police brutality. The big thing is, have you seen the videos? And do the videos really clearly show police brutality? Well, the problem is what part of the video or what part of the action is on video. And you'll see throughout this presentation that what happens before, during, and after, and what's going on outside the video. All these are factors, which we'll get into, that can affect the perception. And perception and clarity are the two words you're going to hear a lot today. the video may start later than it should have, or may be captured by an officer, that second officer that comes there, or an additional, or a bystander who has a camera and wants to videotape. By the way, everything that goes on today's world, someone's got a camera, and if they're near that incident, they're going to be videotaping. So we know for sure in most cases we're going to get several videos, but videos are part of our everyday life, and people love to use videos and capture everything from A to Z, including police actions. You know? Now, use of force is an officer's last option. It's not their first, it's not their third, it's their last option. There are certain parameters that dictate as far as an officer using some form of use of force. We'll talk about the different levels, and we'll get into when and how many of those levels can be used. Remember, there is some discretion according to individual officers, departments, state, city, villages, etc. Policies can vary a little bit. There are some national acceptable standards, though. So going back to 2016, 47% of general purpose law enforcement had body-worn cameras. Recently, 2017-18, that number has gone up and has probably currently today easily in the 60 percentile. The biggest hurdle for departments from having it, no longer is there any resistance or negativity from police about having body-worn cameras. In fact, they have found out it could be their best friend, but it's cost. It's not so much the cost of the cameras, it's cost of storaging it, it's cost of redacting, it's cost of repairs, maintaining, and you have to have a couple, or at least 1, 2, or 3 designated people to do nothing but handle all that video and those cameras. So, also in comparison, if a department has body-worn cameras, BWC as they're called, what we see, which is good, is the majority that have cameras will also have a formal BWC, body-worn camera policy. This is important for you to understand from a legal profession, because you're going to want to also not only judge the action that the officer or officers are showing on the video, you also will have a need to compare the action to make sure it matches the department BWC policy. And different departments do have some slightly or variance in their policies, and you want to make sure that the policy matches the procedure of use of the camera and other uses of tools of defense and self-defense and de-escalation and use of force. So remember, policies must also match the actions and justification. Keep that in mind, because we do run into some significant legal issues sometimes when one department varies a little bit from another. Officer must be aware of it and trained on that policy. Now, I get asked, is there a national database of officer-involved shootings or incidents in which police use force? And the question is there a universal database? There's regional, there's some databases. The FBI keeps some statistics, National Institute of Justice, but we really don't have a one universal national database on officer-involved shootings. This is important. Don't judge before you don't know the whole story. You might take a look at a video and think, oh my God, this is police brutality, or this is improper procedure. You need to look and receive and digest the entire picture. Here's where the problem comes. Too many court cases or potential court cases initially, when we had the video and the body-worn cameras were new, too much emphasis was being put just on the video. basically we were hearing things such as the video doesn't lie, the camera don't lie. That's not true. The camera doesn't lie, but the camera doesn't always capture the entire story, the whole story. Once again, the camera starts and it catches an officer in a very aggressive action with a subject, but the camera didn't capture what was going on before the officer got there, while they were getting there, what's happening on the left side, right side, behind the officer, beyond the subject. Are there other people standing on the sides that you can't see in the camera? Are they holding weapons? Are they screaming and yelling stuff? What's going on? So once again, don't judge before you know the whole story. How do you get the whole story? You might have multiple body-worn cameras by several police. You might have a civilian with a phone video. You also want to look at the reports that the officer, the witness statements, they will fill in those gaps of what happened that you don't see on camera, what was said that you didn't hear. So we really need to get the whole pie, all pieces, before we make a judgment. Big problem is we see quick judgment, and we're seeing that especially by the public when somebody videotapes a short segment of a police officer using force, and it looks like it's very aggressive, and there's no knowledge of why that officer did that, what happened before. Once again, be careful until you know the whole story. So what doesn't the video capture? We talked a little bit about it, but how would a video capture the fear of the officer, the fear of the victims? Okay. Once again, pre-video audio and pre-video visual factors. An officer doesn't leave their camera on as soon as they leave the station. There are situations where they turn it on and turn it off. There are certain mandates in legal where they have to turn it on and turn it off. So it varies a little bit, but pre-video, pre-audio in visual is very important. What about people outside the view area? In this picture here that's on this slide, what would happen if the subject by the car, there were one or two other people standing 5 feet behind him that we don't see that are pointing, they're both pointing another gun. So once again, we don't know and we don't have everything. Be aware of the fact there can be other elements and factors. The only way we can fill it in is by other additional evidence that we can put the picture together. And what's behind the officer? What's beyond the officer? Once again, there's all sorts of non-specific incidences that this comes up on a pretty regular basis. So be aware of it. Widen your scope of thought of what might potentially have happened and of the other pieces that can help put the puzzle together. Now, another problem with the video is, does the video actually capture perception and viewing speed of the officer? You are going to hear me say several times, breaking a video down frame by frame is fine. It helps clarify certain things. But when you break it down frame by frame, that does not provide proper perception and proper viewing speed by the officer. Example, let's say someone pulls something dark out of their front pocket, back pocket, at night, viewing's down, clarity is questionable, lighting's low, and they pull something out and the officer is saying, freeze, do not move your hands, and the person continues to go to their pocket, pulls out a black thing, officer perceives it's potentially a firearm, and it's a phone. Once again, what's the perception? What's the viewing speed? That example, which we have had happen, where a person has gotten shot by an officer, they break the video down frame by frame by frame. And when they do frame by frame, they can stop it and they can look at him going into his pocket, then pulling something out. They stop a frame and they see clearly it's a phone, that it's not a firearm. That officer doesn't have that zoom in lens in his eye to see that it's not a firearm, especially when that officer is saying, do not move your hands, do not go to your pockets, do not do this, stop like you are, turn around, and the person continues to pull a black object out of their pocket. And they do it in what we call very rapid speed, and it's not viewing speed broken down frame by frame. These are the challenges we see all the time with the officers and the problem we have with the camera. Now, I will tell you ahead of time, I will get into it more. Anytime you are utilizing a video in court and you break it down frame by frame by frame, that's fine. But you must show that video in its normal speed. And you should show it to a jury, judge, or whoever a minimum of 3 times or more. They need to see it in normal viewing speed and the perception that the officer got, the short time that the officer had to analyze and digest and come up with a reaction. They need to see it several times, a minimum of 3, really more would be better, 4, 5, 6, but at least 3. You need to show it repetitively so that they get that correct perception of what the officer was seeing embedded in their head. You show it one time, it won't be enough. So I always highly suggest and consult with the legal side in showing it. And once again, the other side is always going to show it frame by frame. That's why you need to emphasize the normal speed of that view. Just remember, perception and viewing speed are crucial when using videos in court. Here's another issue. Does the video actually capture the same clarity of view of the officer? Okay, here's a really good picture because it shows a camera lens versus the naked eye. And obviously, the view inside that black circle camera lens is what? Much more clear, much more defined. Outside that circular black lens, we see fog or mist or not clear picture, not sharp color, whatever. We see a difference. Understand, you're showing a video or camera or photos from a camera. The video is going to be enhanced with electronic ability to show something much better. But that is not what the officer is seeing. That is what the camera is seeing, and the camera is upgrading that vision, but it does not match what the officer is seeing. So clarity of view is also a big factor. Case in point, infrared enabled body cameras. Now this is an enabled heat sensing infrared type of camera that might be able to pick up bodies in a room that you may not be able to see with the naked eye. Taking this a step further, there are body-worn cameras that have what we call a red eye. And the red eye is, it just needs less light to see better at night. So the officer can barely see something in the darkness of the night. A camera equipped with red eye almost makes it look like it's very clear to see what's going on. So once again, if those cameras are equipped on that police officer, it has to be explained that that camera is enhanced with an ability to see much better than the naked eye. A lot of police departments today are not buying or they're getting rid of cameras that are enhanced with any kind of red eye, infrared that changes the clarity and the picture of what the officer is seeing significantly. And when I say significantly, it's like day and night. So we're seeing a lot of demand not to have that ability because it's not capturing what the officer really saw. And that is a big problem and a bigger problem because the officer does not depend on that camera to see anything. It's just a backup to the action of that officer. So, talk a little bit about the use of force continuum and how all this fits. You know, the right to use force is a right of an individual or authority to settle conflicts or prevent certain actions by incorporating or using force. Now, that can be either an escalation or a de-escalation. But basically, use of force hopefully dissuades another party, person, or group from a particular course of action, usually a aggressive action or an increase in aggressive action, and use of force is also used to physically intervene to hopefully de-escalate or totally stop the person or persons from a negative aggressive action or resistance, increasing their resistance. What is a continuum? Basically, it's guidelines to take control of a situation that threatens security, and it protects the police officer and others, as well as protecting the subject from himself. So the continuum is based on one factor that an officer can use force of equal value that the subject is using or one level above. Once again, the use of force continuum, the basic premise of it is an officer can use equal force or one level above to take control of the situation and de-escalate it. And be careful that you understand you can go one level above. Now, that doesn't mean you go to the highest level when they're at a low level. Someone that's screaming, yelling, and spitting and calling police officers names should not be dealt with by pulling a firearm out and shooting them. That's way above the level that they're utilizing. Police officers do have discretion on the use of levels. And I want to point out, once again, what is that officer seeing? What is that officer feeling? Is there fear? Is there danger? You got other factors. The size of the individual compared to the size of the officer. What about a 260-pound guy, male, who's charging with a knife at a 120-pound female? Does that increase the need for the use of force continuum to increase? Sure, it does. But pretty much anybody charging you, raging with a knife, pretty much is going to allow officers to use force to a higher level. But we do take in consideration the environment, both subjects and officers, how many people are there, how many officers are there, the environment, the lighting, everything. So that's what discretion's about. And here you go, your use of force continuum. Once again, you have officer presence. Officer presence is a simple lowest level of the use of force continuum. How many times is something going on and a cruiser starts to drive up, just the cruiser starting to arrive does things, or people scatter, run, or get in their cars and leave. An officer physically walking up, what does that do? Starting to communicate to them. We call it tactical communication. letting them know if they don't stop, if they don't leave, if they don't get in their cars and go, if they don't do this, they could be arrested. And physical controls. There's lots of different physical controls. Two officers grabbing an arm each of a subject, nerve points, and all these different type of what we call passive physical controls. Okay. Your defensive and intermediate weapons, usually it's your mace, your pepper spray, batons, taser. Those are all in that mid-range. And disengagement, a kind of different tactical type of engagements or engagements with the subject. And then, of course, lethal force. So, lethal force obviously is the highest. The bottom line on lethal force is you have to fear your life is in danger or that you're in danger of serious physical harm. Okay? Someone standing 20 feet away with a crowbar is not a need to use lethal force, i.e., shooting the individual. But that individual's 20 feet away and starts to run towards you fast with the crowbar high in the air, screaming and yelling at you, there it escalates from non-lethal force to lethal force. Same scenario, person standing 20 feet away has a firearm pointed down on the ground. Obviously, that officer is going to have their gun out pointed at him and is giving them instructions to drop the gun. If the person drops the gun, no justification to shoot them. But let's say that person then brings the gun up, doesn't fire it, just brings it up and points it at the officer. We have justification. So you got to take circumstances, situations into consideration. So there's 5 levels of use of force, which we kind of went over. But just a recap, presence is always first. Obviously, verbalization, we call this verbal judo. Using key words, key pronunciations, screaming something to them, being loud versus soft, all that. The type of words you use, how you use them. Empty hand controls or putting your hands on them, no tools. The intermediate is your tasers, your mace, pepper spray. Even handcuffs can become a weapon. And then, of course, deadly force. But this is to recap. You got basic 5 levels that we have to be concerned about. And you can go up and down according to what's going on and what the level of the threat is. You could go up and that subject could back off and start to pull away from you. Your use of force may also de-escalate because they're less of a threat. So it can go up and down. It does not need to go from one to the next. You could go from verbalization to deadly force. If you're talking to someone 10 feet away and they're just rambling, but all of a sudden they reach in the back of their small of their back and they pull a gun out, you're going from level 2 to level 5 like instantly. These are the kind of things that get captured on the video too, and those are the ones that really help. So when an officer is confronted by a threat, he's got some basic options. Obviously, he's got to defend. He needs to take appropriate actions. And ultimately, he's got to neutralize or de-escalate this situation pronto. He needs to make sure he does it. He can't just say, oh, no big deal, and walk away. Sometimes they can in that because the person is just talking or talking out loud. Many times walking away is an appropriate action. And as you walk away, the person stops their verbalization. So, once again, that's officer presence or officer decreasing their presence. Interesting scenarios. Now, the total perspective of the threat many times can't be captured on the video. We talked about it, but I'm going to beat this horse up. because the video captures quite a bit. But the problem is we need to understand what the video does not capture. Once again, you can get that from reports, interviews, other videos, civilians, different things. We've had officers who had wore body cams, and part of it was captured, and they said certain things happened. The subject said it didn't, and the car dash cam was left on, and it captured the video actions of the subject that were not captured by the body cam, and it was that video from the cruiser dash cam that exonerated the officer, because up to that point there was a belief by looking at the body cam potentially the officer overstepped his bounds, but with the other camera it matched up to what the officer said did take place, and the subject was lying, period. Now, video normal speed versus frame by frame. I repeat this slide because this is one of the most crucial things to understand. If you walk away today with anything, understand the difference between normal speed and frame by frame viewing. Also, please understand that without a doubt, the one side is going to show frame by frame. I have not been in a case yet with video where someone, one side or the other, breaks it down frame by frame. Many times both sides do to point out their strengths and weaknesses. But never, never, never allow a frame by frame to be shown without following up with full normal speed and doing it once again several times, at least 3 or more times. You have to re-acclimate the jury, judge, or others about the normal speed viewing. If not, and the only thing that is shown is frame by frame, that has a very strong prejudicial influence on people in the court, all people, everybody involved. Now, what about social media influence? This is a huge problem. If anything is taking place by the police, safety forces, anything unusual, people are around. Everybody has a cell phone, and every cell phone has the ability to take a video. People are taking videos of everything that goes on in the world, and anything that starts to escalate to any degree of anything, and that involves safety forces, there's chances there's going to be several civilians videotaping it. And those videos could be very helpful, and they can be very harmful. Once again, how much is on their video? What angle are they at? Are they at a side angle versus the officer's front angle? So once again, you got to deal with that. Now, the other problem is they take a video, and guess what? First thing they do is call the news media locally. They want to go on TV and talk about how they captured this, or they want the news media to say their name, and this thing goes viral. Why does it go viral? Everybody's interested in watching police use of force, or police or safety force actions, or a house burning down, or two people fighting. It doesn't matter. The more aggressive or whatever, the more video you're going to see. And the problem again is capturing the entire story doesn't usually happen. That's why the multiple videos are important. You'll see terrorist acts or major assaults and active shooter and incidents. First thing the FBI will do is ask anybody that took any pictures or video, please send them to this location, this website, or this link. And the reason being, boy, they get all those multiple videos. They can put the whole picture together, all pieces to the pie, to the puzzle. So we're in an age of electronics. This is the new that we need to deal with, but we need to understand how to objectively utilize video. Once they put it out on a viral and it's just a short snippet that really represents an incident by, say, a police officer, safety forces that may not look good, once they put it out there, it goes viral very fast. It is so hard to change the opinion of many people of did that person act, correctly. So often it can become very anti-police and pro-suspect, and it shouldn't. Once again, it's due to the lack of the complete story. That is why you'll have police hold off releasing videos until they can get other information that can go along with the video to show parts and pieces, but also to explain the whole story of what happened or to show other pieces of video. Okay, use of force by law enforcement is obviously it's necessary and is permitted under specific circumstances, such as self-defense of another individual group, self-defense of the officer, protecting property, etc. I can go on, but officers by law enforcement, it's a necessity of their job, and they're permitted to use self-defense for themselves and others in protection of people and property. That is a given guarantee. Now, let's talk about reaction time as a key variable when an officer chooses to use force. This becomes crucial because an officer is thrown a lot of stimuli, a lot of quick action by a person. He does not get the opportunity to rewind the camera, look at it, and go, oh, let me look at this frame by frame. Let me look at it a couple times. Then I'll decide what my reaction is going to be. Remember, reaction time is one time, very quickly, not a lot of time to take a break and debate what's going on. It is absorbing a lot of action, processing it, and then trying to make sure you do the right thing. That's why you have a lot of incidences that on video you go, oh, well, that's simple because, yeah, you watched it 6 times, but you watch it one time. And usually people have a different reaction the first time versus the 5th or 6th time. And in fact, what's kind of ironic, when they show the video, say the news or to a jury or to a judge or whoever, a lot of people will say, I need to see that again. I need to see it another time and another time. They're looking, can you slow it down? Can you go frame by frame? They do not have the ability to totally absorb and make it an objective decision. That's what the officer is really stuck with. And that's what needs to be explained and shown when you're introducing videos. Now, I'm going to stop here for a second and just ask people, if you have a question, please submit it, and Tracy will stop me, and I will be more than glad to answer a few questions at this point. I will keep going, but I want to encourage some questions, some interaction. Okay, let's move on to simulators. We're using a lot more simulators for training and for proving that video footage in many cases shows that perception is not that easy to really see or capture. Reaction time is very difficult and happens much faster than we realize. And there's a need for a clear understanding of all factors, because this is all comes down to human response, and human response characteristics are simply not easy to capture nor control. So keep in mind that we're actually taking simulators and showing people, anybody and many people would have a hard time in reacting as the officer did. There was an interesting simulator kind of study that we did here in Ohio. we had several religious leaders upset with some use of force by police officers, and trying to, and I don't want to use the word argue, but engage discussion, hard discussion with them about what the officer did. What was done was we had several of these religious leaders, about a half a dozen of them. We wired them up and we put them in a simulator. And the scenarios were a guy getting out of a car, reaching in his pocket, pulling a gun as he come around the car to engage the officer. Now, the officer in the simulator was the religious leaders. They played the police officer. And we did several scenarios where, cars and buildings, and just simple cases that have happened to many officers. And it was amazing. And we told them, you decide whether you shoot the individual or not, or that you should, or that you need to pull your gun out or whatever. And we put them through several cases or situations in the simulators. And the bottom line, what had happened is many of these religious leaders failed to react properly, but they felt the fear, the unknown, the hesitation. And in many cases, they ended up shooting the subject in the simulator who was coming around a car in a building, opening a door, who reached for a cell phone. And then sometimes we had the individual actually have a real firearm, and they failed to be able to react to that. What happened here is they started not being nowhere near good on their reaction. And when you get towards the end, because somebody got shot with a phone, now in other simulations later on, they started hesitating to use their firearm. So it has a dual effect, but I thought it was an interesting kind of mini proof of it just isn't simple.
Tim,
go ahead.
Tim, we have a question.
Yeah.
We have a viewer who would like you to please revisit disengagement as a level of force. They're a little confused of what that actually entails.
Okay, good question. What disengagement is in a level of force? An example is an officer comes on a scene and someone's standing in a parking lot and they're screaming and yelling. They see the officer and it increases their rage. Maybe they don't have a good relationship or a past history with the officer. They're standing in that parking lot just yelling and screaming, and they see the officer, and that really, they start calling the officer different names and different things, and what are you here for? Leave me alone. So the officer walks away from that individual, and that individual starts to lower their tone and yelling at them. The officer then goes towards their cruiser, and the person continues to disengage. The officer gets in their cruiser and starts to drive away, and that person totally stops screaming and yelling. That person is not hurting anybody, not threatening anybody, and as the officer pulls away, that person stops totally, goes to their car, and moves on. So disengagement sometimes we get into situations and an officer's presence can cause something, but there's no danger, so the officer disengages. Okay? Another example of disengagement is officers are called to a home. They get to the door. The guy comes to the door, grabs the woman around the neck, puts a gun to her head, and says, "Don't come in here or I'll kill her." That officer disengages, okay? He can't pull his gun out and shoot a guy who's holding a woman with his arm around her and get what he believes a fair or good firearm shot to stop him. And what does he do? He disengages. He disengages and says, "No problem, no problem. I'm leaving. He goes back and gets cover, and he disengages. And now what do? Obviously, they bring a SWAT team, a negotiator out, and they talk this individual down, and they talk to him maybe by phone, and he tells them that he has some issues going on and this and that, and they finally convince him to put his firearm down and walk out peacefully. Those are disengagement types of things. I appreciate that question. Please ask any other additional questions. This is good interaction. Um, in this slide, I said this at the beginning. Officers receive guidance from their departments, but there's no universal set of rules governing when officers should use force and how much. I want to emphasize that there are, and I hate to use the word universal, but there are some national standards, acceptable standards that are use of force standards. That use of force continuum I showed you, that's 5 steps. It may change the names of each of the steps, but basically it falls along the same acceptable guidelines. What I want to point out though is you have to be cognizant that different departments or cities or state or federal law enforcement may have some slightly different allowances or hesitations for using certain things. Use of force, it's pretty universal. Danger to yourself or others, feel of serious threat, bodily harm. But there's some other things, intermediate type stuff. Now, I'll give you an example where we see some differences in, say, some guidelines on police departments, and that is the use of a taser. We have seen some variance in one department to another of when they want or would permit an officer to use a taser. Electronic control device is what they're called, ECD. And that would be an example. So bottom line is there's different guidelines by departments. Another area I can tell you where universal is not universal, and it can vary a little bit department to department, is police vehicle chases. An officer engages with his cruiser. He's chasing a individual who ran a red light or was speeding. He put his lights siren on to pull him over, and they took off. There's departments that will allow the officers to pursue him only for a certain distance. There's guidances that will allow them to pursue only for things outside of a traffic violation. There's procedures that will only allow one officer and one backup cruiser to engage in the hot pursuit, lights and sirens, and it must be monitored by a supervisor and can be called off at any time by that supervisor. We've had pursuit situations happen. We had one here in Cleveland that happened several years ago. There must have been, I don't know, 10, 12, maybe more cruisers lined up all over chasing this guy and girl. They ended up pulling in a back area. They were blocked in. They ended up, use of force escalated to the highest level. These two individuals were shot in their car because the perception was the one gentleman was pulling out a gun in the front seat of the car. This was a sad case because I believe it was over 60 to 80 shots fired at these two individuals in the car. And the question was there really a gun? Was a run really seen? Did the adrenaline cause it? Why did we have 12, 14 cars in pursuit? Should it have been called off? What was the original reason for starting the pursuit? Why didn't the supervisors intercede? So it's stuff like that. Now that one, the guidelines got totally revamped after that happened. And lots of times negative things happen that cause probably better adjustments on police procedures.
Tim,
Graham,
we have another question
yep,
regarding guidelines. How
sure.
do department how do how do department use of force guidelines intersect with manufacturer suggested use guidelines? An example being that the manufacturer has guidelines regarding breech rounds, rubber bullets, etc.
Yeah, a very good question. When the manufacturer provides guidelines with their use of tool, um, that becomes it actually becomes good and bad. Now, the good is the manufacturer is basing their guidelines on what they feel is potentially legitimate documentation, testing, etc. Most of the manufacturers put those guidelines on because two reasons. Number one, they're basing it on experimentation of the tool and what it most effectively does. And secondly, they're doing it because all these manufacturers now are getting pulled into the lawsuits if a police department uses per se rubber bullets for the wrong reason, someone gets seriously injured, and it doesn't meet the manufacturing guidelines, then that department is more liable, and that company then has the ability to say, we set the guidelines. They're the ones that went against our guidelines. It's their problem, and it gets the manufacturers out of it. But they're not just saying it to get out of the liability. They are saying it because they do want some standards, and they're usually basing it on experimentation and research. So the next piece of that is police departments actually appreciate the fact that there's potential guidelines that comes with the use of those tools, those defensive tools for police departments, because it makes it easier on them to set their police guidelines to convince their officers this is when and only when and how you use it. And they can emphasize we want to match the guidelines of the manufacturer. So if you have a case where the guidelines match what the manufacturer says and the action of the officer matches those guidelines, you got a much stronger case. I will get calls for liability issues. I testify across the United States, and quite honestly, I'm former law enforcement, and I've had to testify for and against police departments and for and against police officers. But my job is I am paid as an expert to testify on objectively, was the action proper? Did it follow the guidelines? And was it the best, avenue to choose, et cetera, et cetera? And what happens is, several times I've run into departments or officers that went way beyond the use of the recommendation of that tool. And in many cases, it also was outside the scope of the use of force continuum guidelines. So, bottom line, manufacturer recommendations are really good. Guidelines should be set to match them. If they don't, there should be stated reason why, how, and a reason. They can go beyond the manufacturer guidelines. You really want to be careful going outside the guidelines. It can become tough. There are some that have, but they've justified they're using it in a unique way for unique situations. Most of the times, the guidelines are a plus for everybody. Okay, Graham versus Connor. Reasonableness must be judged from the perspective of a reasonable officer on the scene. Once again, to the court case, 20/20 vision, hindsight, sitting in the back seat, slowing the camera down frame by frame, tearing it apart piece by piece. No, it's going to be judged by what a reasonable officer on the scene would. What would his vision and response be? How does he feel? Not taking this thing apart piece by piece. Courts are always challenged in the video footage to capture what? the perspective of a reasonable officer. This is exactly why I stress it. All videos are going to be broken down frame by frame. Please show the normal speed of what the officer saw and do it several times. Because in use of force, without a doubt, they will break it down. Tennessee and Gardner, deadly force may be used to prevent escape fleeing felon only if the officer has probable cause to believe this person could cause serious risk to the officer or to others. Okay? You know, now, a video is not going to capture that officer's mental knowledge of the criminal history of the subject, and that person may be a fleeing felon. Let's say they went to roll call, they were showing a picture of a couple people that escaped from jail, that committed a crime, witnesses pinned it on them, and the officers in many cases say, I'm very familiar with that person. And let's say they know that person, they know that person's history, and now this person just murdered someone, attacked someone, put someone in the hospital. In that roll call, they say, this person is dangerous. We need to capture him. Officers going down the street, sees the person in a car, goes after him. The person ditches the car, gets out, and runs. Okay? Is that a fleeing felon? Absolutely, it's a fleeing. Does that officer know that person was shown in roll call? They know him personally or they know of him. Could they be a serious risk? Absolutely, they could. This is the kind of things that they need. Someone who is on the street, the officer's pulling up and they see the person shoot another person, take off. The officer is obviously chasing them. They are a fleeing felon. You know, and can they use deadly force? And the answer is yes. That officer just witnessed him trying to kill someone, or they have knowledge that they committed a felon, and they chase him. And then that person, turns around with a gun, knife to resist, and it even escalates more. So make sure we understand what all this entails with Tennessee versus Gardner. Statistics, yeah. Police encounters, realistically, 1.4% or just a little under 600,000 people reported a use of force or threat. 25% will say during these encounters, an officer pointed a gun at me. Well, once again, pointing a gun is another level, and it's different than firing the gun. And usually if they're pointing the gun, the officer is not going to shoot unless that other subject escalates his or her level of aggression or attack. Remember, pulling the gun is another level. 53% cite physical force, kicking, grabbing, pushing. 75% report that they thought the force was excessive and unwanted. Now, just in the first 5 months of 2015, this is just to give you a feel for what it is. We got about 400 people shot first half of a year, 400 to 500. This is just a statistic that kind of gives us an idea of what's going on. A lot of people think it's thousands of people, several thousand per year, and it's not. Anything above zero is too many, but many of these were flat-out criminal shootings, engagements with law enforcement. Obviously, not all of them are justifiable, but this gives us a feel. Now, use of force can differ between departments based on how policies are established. I went over this pretty well, and I pretty well established the fact, and I'll stress again, what is the action of the officer if they're using certain tools? It was brought up about manufacturing suggestions. What are the local, the state, and national standards or uses? What are the policies of a department? I've had two police departments next to each other in a vicinity, and they had some slightly different guidelines for different things, such as use of taser in vehicle pursuits. It doesn't make either one of them right or wrong, but there is some variance, and those officers are bound to those, and they're going to be reviewed and compared. Um, so definitely, we're talking split second syndrome, as we call it, with the use of force. Um, how many officers walk up to a car and they get shot? I did this presentation previously, and it was asked about, why do officers have their guns out when they walk up to cars? Well, in most situations, one of the most highest times or situations where officers get shot at, hurt, or killed is traffic stops, approaching vehicles. So officers will pull their weapon out, have it down at the side. That's a lower level, but it's a be ready level. And the reason for that is traffic stops have the highest incidence of officers getting shot and hurt. Secondly, the person in the car has an advantage because you can't see below, their armpit level, what's in the door, on the seat, on the floor, what's in their hand, what they're reaching for. And they can use that to their advantage if they really wanted to shoot the officer. So some of the training has suggested the officer have the gun out already, because if that person comes out with a gun pointed towards the officer, that officer will increase their survival rate if the gun is already out of their holster in that situation, because they do not see the total action from the car seat or lap of the passenger or driver all the way up to the level of the window. Once they get to the level of the window with a firearm, that officer can be shot right now. So that's why the adjustment there has been made in officers having their firearm out. Nothing wrong with that. We want officers to survive. They're not pointing it at any of the drivers or passenger, but they're just one step more closer in case they need it. So, debate is still whether the video can truly capture objectively the process of a rapid decision. This is the biggest question, and in most cases, it's very hard. And if we look at it from the view of the normal speed of the video, we can increase our ability to capture objectively what was going on and what limited time in decision and action did we view on that decision of that officer. Once again, it goes back to showing the video in normal speed several times. So, okay, I'll give a second here. If there are any additional questions, Tracy will relay them to me. If not, I'll keep moving on. All right. 2 ways to reduce officer-involved shooting. Basically, this is it. Body cameras have reduced it, and we're improving the training by what we're learning. And these are 2 major things, and it's working. There's a lot of benefits officers wearing body cameras. At first, I would say to you, across the country, there was resistance from police officers not wanting to wear body cameras, worried about misinterpretation, worried about challenges, worried about the cameras able to capture everything. But the cameras have become a really good thing. Why? Because it lets you see what the officer sees. It can reframe incidents and reduce anti-police sentiment. We actually see body cams actually eliminating a lot of negativity and getting people to believe in the officers and their police departments. So we see a definite reduction in citizen complaints. We see a definite reduction in crime. Officers respond to homes, businesses, parking lots, fights, whatever, and people get up and go, oh, he's got a body cam. So they know they can't start saying shit, threatening stuff, doing physical things. It's a deterrent, and it's a good deterrent. Citizens say they feel safer with it. and they feel that they're going to be treated more objectively. You know, we're seeing a savings of money. These faster criminal cases, less time on paperwork, and less time in court requirements because the camera shows some real blatant stuff done by subjects, and it works. Uh, there's a much higher number of citizen complaints resolved in police favor. We'll have someone complaining that the police officer did this, this, and this, and said this, this, and this, and then all of a sudden we show them a body cam video, and they hear it and they see it, and boom, they know that it's real clear there of what they said and what they did. Those are great cases for body cams for the police. It does decrease the use of force. Let's be honest, people that use force want to get aggressive. Many of them are always looking around. They're seeing if they can get away with it. There's witnesses or whatever. Now they got to look for witnesses, and they got to look if there's body cams. For some reason, which is a good reason, body cams do de-escalate people. And there's a higher number of arrests and citations by body cam officers. So we have some real positive stuff. Some other things, much better transparency, increased civility, quicker resolution, complaints and lawsuits. Many times the body cams, it's very clear, it's very simple. They show the whole thing. It's not a big debate. We get into the complicated ones with the use of force. That's where we really get into needing a lot more information as the approach before, during the confrontation. But a lot of times body cams just corroborate evidence along with other cameras in public and other people's cameras. And obviously we can use the videos for training opportunities when we do things right and when we do things wrong or slightly not correct. Officers, we use the law enforcement will use those videos as training opportunities. And it's very effective because it helps the officer to see the perspective of what everybody else is seeing and how what they do has a certain flavor or whatever. This is interesting. Body cameras, when they're used, the use of force is reduced by as much as 50% at departments. We've actually seen it go as high as 60, 70, and 80% in different departments. So I think body cameras, there's a lot more positive than negative. And I think we're understanding how to use them better and what's permissible and not permissible. But one thing we're seeing, we're not seeing the need for use of force as much because of the body cam. Okay? Now, people ask about the money, reduced costs. We're having less money spent on investigations, times, and officers being in court and prosecution. And you'd be surprised, it really does translate into some money. What have they shown? There's been studies out that shows about, per officer in a department, going to court less, getting people to plead out, the camera showing clearly. We're averaging about $3,000 annually per officer. So you take a department with 100 people, and we got $300,000. You take a department with 20 people. It's still, it's still some good money that can be used for other things. Now, police video transparency becomes a law with some exceptions. Okay, so what do we have to redact? I get asked all the time, what's the process? Well, the police absolutely must redact video files before they release it to the public. Now, this can be costly and labor intensive, and once again, that's why I say that, body cameras do have their pluses and minuses. The minuses is you really need to have one or two people who do nothing but work with these body cam videos. Redaction is important. Many times an officer is involved in some type of action. The reason the police departments can't instantly release it to the news media isn't because they're hiding something. It's because they got to redact stuff. There's innocent bystanders there. We can't put their face out there on this video. There's certain types of situations that have to be redacted, which we'll go over. So, some exceptions to public access. Dead or injured bodies, except in cases where the death or injury was caused by the police. So, if you just have someone that was just shot 16 times and they're laying bleeding on the ground and dead, and the officer walks up and that body is there, that body is someone's family member. That's going to be redacted. It's going to be blocked out. There's no need for that. We don't have to show the details of that. Violence, unless the violence is carried out. If it's a peace officer or police officer and it's pretty violent, then they will leave it and they won't redact it. And then, of course, you get the disclaimers. We're about ready to show you something here on the news, but please be advised, this could upset you and you may not want to watch it. And you get into nude bodies. There's a nude body found on a roadside or in a woods that was beaten, raped, mutilated. We don't need to show that. We can redact that. You know, Identifying information about alleged victims of sex. We don't need to show sex offense victims' faces or anything in their license plate of their vehicle. We don't need to do things like that. That'll be redacted. And personal information, who's not arrested or charged by police. Big question I get all the time is, what about residences, interiors? If an officer goes to a residence, he or she can turn the body cam off going into the residence. Or if it's on and they do go in there and nothing happens, they are mandated that be redacted and deleted unless it's really part of a crime scene or a process. And can someone ask you on a private residence to turn it off? Yes. Now, if some violence or the officer starts to have to use of force or anything in that house, they are permitted to turn it back on. So, it depends on what the incident is. Like we said before, body cams can have a very calming effect and they make everyone behave better. This has probably been one of the best benefits of a body cam. For some reason, someone sees a body cam, but that's just like someone being upset and somebody from the news media sitting there zooming in on them. All of a sudden, they know this isn't no secret no more. Officers were initially skeptical, but now the majority of police departments are very proactive about the cameras. They want the right cameras, and we're learning how to redact properly, how to defend, how to present this information in court. So they're looking at it as this could be their best eyewitness. I'm going to end there because I want to take any additional questions. Let me say, if you do have additional questions now or in the future as part of participating with the Akron Bar Association, you are more than welcome to call me, text me, email me, Tim Demoff, and I'd be glad to engage you in some conversation and obviously help you on any cases officially if you would need it. So, Tracy, are there any additional questions?
I don't see any questions at this time. If you do have questions, as Tim mentioned, you can add them in the questions component of the dashboard.
We'll give everybody a few seconds here if they want to type something in. Here's a question coming across on my Q&A here. Why has the perspective of body-worn cameras increased by police officers today compared to 5 years ago? That's a good question. Bottom line on that is that police officers, I guess just like everybody else at first, paranoid, worried about backseat judges, not judges, judicial, but people looking at it and not having the proper attitude or tools to interpret it. And I think they looked at it as somebody, the outsiders, trying to tell them how to do their job, and they don't have the training, nor the experience of what that officer is. But as we train officers across the country, we really, the bottom line, and I had a slide on it, we tell them the body cam is your best eyewitness. And once again, we also tell the officers, if you're acting within the guidelines of your police department, the guidelines of acceptable standards across the United States, you really very rarely have anything to worry about, and you have a lot to be thankful for. Once again, I understand some concerns, because the biggest problem we have is when people break it down frame by frame by frame, and then it's not counteracted with showing it several times and bringing in the additional evidence, other videos, reports, witnesses, interviews by other people that were there that observed it. So once again, I'll stress, make sure you show the full video several times, and make sure you collectively get all the other evidence along with the camera. With that, you can take a video that may not look the greatest, and you can make it understood to be not truly what they're seeing. And that was the hard thing to overcome. People thought cameras don't lie, and that's not true. Cameras don't always tell you the total story. Any
Tim,
other
we do
questions?
have a question. Yeah.
Okay.
The question is, has anyone been successful with an argument to only show the video at normal speed?
That's a great question. I will tell you this. I've been involved in several cases where they said, we should only show the video at normal speed because that's what the officer, that's the speed, and that's the real situation that the officer saw it at. And of course, the counter to that is, we totally agree with you. We'd be glad to show it to the jury at the normal speed so they can see what the officer saw. But we think there's value in breaking it down frame by frame by frame to clarify maybe any confusion. And back to my statement, in answer to the question, no one's successfully yet that I'm aware of in all the cases I have, and I've had that question come up. No one successfully said we can't break it down frame by frame by frame. The other problem is when you resist it and you argue, no, we're not going to show it to you frame by frame by frame, it potentially casts aspersions that the officer in his defense is trying to hide something. So we have that problem too. But the bottom line is, it's not been successfully argued yet in court. Great question.
Sure. Tim, we have another question here. Do you have any advice on how a prosecutor can preserve a good record for a resisting arrest or aggravated assault case that may turn into a civil excessive force case for a police department?
How, you want to read that again? I'm sorry.
Sure. Do you have any advice on how a prosecutor can preserve a good record for a resisting arrest or aggravated assault case that may turn into a civil excessive force case for a police department?
Yeah. There are departments, along with their prosecuting offices in their jurisdiction in their counties, that the prosecutor's office needs to sit down with the police department, and they need to have an agreement, a written agreement, that in all use of force cases, that the video reports, all evidence, all eyewitness statements, everything, when the criminal part is done, that those cases collectively, everything related to that case, including the capture of video if it exists, be put into a separate file and preserved for X amount of years, that under the statute the person could come back civilly to sue them on. and be put into a separate file and preserved until the expiration of the legal ability to file a lawsuit. And what happens here is um, we have a lot of police departments that don't have any kind of agreement with the prosecutor's office in that they both collectively would put all materials involved, the police materials, videos, reports, and the prosecution would take their files and collectively put them together. And then there'd be a designated location for that to be put until the expiration of how long it can stay in existence before a lawsuit. So it comes down to just the prosecutor and the departments working together, but putting both sides in. I basically tell departments, create a box of evidence, both from the police and prosecutors, mark it, have one designated storage area where those are kept. And that has proven to work out very effectively.
All right. We don't have any more questions at this time. So we
Okay.
want to thank you for joining us today. We'd also like to thank our speaker, Tim Demoff, President and founder of Sachs Consulting and Investigative Services Incorporated, and our webinar sponsor, the TASA Group. This concludes our webinar. Take care and have a great day.
Thank you.